Hey guys, it's Lisa with Are You My Cousin? And I want to welcome you to our weekly Facebook Live. I'm so excited to be here this Thursday afternoon. And I am thrilled that you guys are able to join me, whether you're watching live with me now or whether you are watching one of the replays. That's all wonderful. So, if you're just joining us, if you don't mind giving me a thumbs up to let me know, that just lets me know everything is working well and that you guys can see me and hear me. That would be a fantastic help for me. If you are watching this as a replay on the YouTube channel, because I do post my replays on YouTube, just any links that I mention, you will find them down in the description below. If you're watching live on Facebook or if you're watching the Facebook replay, you'll find those links that I mentioned in the comment section. So no worries there. It's always there. Feel free as we chat this afternoon to leave me a comment. If you have a question about anything I say, something you feel like others might benefit from, I would love to have a comment from you. If you are just now joining me, if you don't mind just giving me a thumbs up, something to let me know. Hey, Sherry, thank you. Just to let me know that you guys can see me and hear me okay. So we have Sherry from Pennsylvania. Wonderful. Glad that you guys are here. So today, it's a little bit of a hodgepodge. We are going to be talking about the pre-1850 census tips that I have for you today. But I had a couple of announcements to make and a couple of things to share because I had a really fantastic experience this past weekend. As you guys know, I do speak on genealogy topics as well, and I had the opportunity to speak in my my hometown actually to it was a joint presentation for the library patrons as well as the DAR of the Cabarrus County, North Carolina area. So it was really fabulous to go to the library, and a place that I spent many, many hours as a child growing up to speak to this group. And even better, my parents actually attended and were able to hear me speak because they've never actually heard me speak before. So that was a really kind of exciting thing to have happen. And I got to see people I know in the audience as well. So it was a lot of fun. And one of the things that I shared with them, and you guys may find this rather ironic as well, is that when I was in high school there in Concord, there were three things that I really didn't like about school. Now, I actually really liked school, so don't get me wrong. I liked school a lot, but there were three things that I really didn't like. One, was history. I didn't like history classes. I also could not stand getting up in front of the class to give a presentation. And I didn't like to write. And so we see how all that kind of came full circle and worked out for me, right? Because that's all I do these days. So I thought that was kind of funny that that's sort of how it came about, as well as doing it in my hometown. Hey, Faye, thanks for joining me again today. So I thought that was just kind of a fun thing and a really fun, exciting adventure for me to do. Now, one of the things that I talked with them about, well, actually, the whole focus of my talk this past weekend was on finding female ancestors and really trying to get people to think outside of the genealogy research box, thinking outside of our usual routes of research. And so I thought this is a great time to announce to you guys. I had mentioned in a previous Facebook Live that I was writing a new book. And so now I can tell you that it is actually about finding female ancestors. So I am working on completing that book. I do not have a launch date for that yet, but as soon as I do, I will absolutely let you know. I am so excited about it. The problem is I keep finding new things to add to it. So it's hard to finish because I just get so into finding all these little interesting tidbits about women's lives and history that help me be able to add more value to that book for you guys. So that's exciting. Hey, Jim, how are you? Jim didn't like history either. And I know it does change when you get older. I think that's so funny how we kind of come about with that. Totally. I think my parents were really surprised that here was this, their daughter who loved school, did well in school, who didn't like to be in front of people, is now standing in front of crowds talking. So interesting. Hey, Melinda, so glad you could join us from New York. So those are my two things. So so there will be a new book announcement coming out soon. Again, it is about finding your female ancestors. It is going to be talking a lot about unusual resources. It's going to be talking about strategies to help us get outside of our research, our general research workflows, as I call them, and move on to hopefully breaking down some brick walls, or at least knocking some bricks out of those walls. So one of the other things that I wanted to share with you is that when I speak to groups, there's some common themes that come up in the Q&A. And I thought this would be a good platform as well to share those with you, and just to share those. And I learned some things from some of the listeners as well. And that's another really fantastic benefit that comes out. But one of the very common things that I learned that gets asked a lot are questions about how to find birth, death, and marriage records. Now, specifically, a lot of times what people are asking me about is they're trying to find a birth certificate or a death certificate for maybe an ancestor. And when I question them further and ask them, when was your ancestor born, or when did your ancestor die? And they tell me, okay, I'm trying to find the birth record, and my great-great-grandmother was born in 1895. And what I can immediately tell them, well, my next question is where, the location. What state are you looking in? And of course, this past weekend, it was North Carolina, because I was speaking to mostly North Carolina researchers. And I can tell you immediately, I said, there is no birth certificate. Do not waste your time looking. Because in North Carolina, birth certificates, death certificates were not required until 1913. In South Carolina, not till 1915. And a lot of compliance didn't really occur until the First World War, or up until about 1920 or so. So I think researchers sometimes are looking for records that don't exist. And so it will behoove you, as I shared with the group, when you are looking for a record, and before you go looking for a specific record, make sure that location, do your homework up front, make sure those records existed, that they were recorded originally. And if they were, make sure they're still existing. The very first thing I do when I start research in a new location is I go to their archive site, I go to the Family Search Wiki page for that particular county, and I learn what records were created when did they start recording births, marriages, and deaths, what records were recorded, and if there were any major record losses, and what was lost, what did not survive. Guys, we have so many ancestors to research. None of us has time to waste researching or looking for records that don't exist. So that would be one of my biggest tips for you guys as you go about your research, particularly as you start new areas or new locations for your research. Jim said history wasn't taught well in school. I think for me, that was the case. I mean, I had very knowledgeable teachers, Jim, you're right, but a straight lecture style wasn't my thing. I always really enjoyed history a lot better, like you guys probably. We get into the records and we get the stories. To me, that's a lot more interesting. The other thing that kind of came up in this particular talk that I hear a lot too is folks aren't completely analyzing documents that they might have. So for instance, in an estate sale record, and if you haven't read an estate sale, oftentimes they list every item that the deceased person had. This is typically with an intestate estate, so there was no will. So they have to list out all the items, and they have a sale, and people buy them. And you have a list of people in the community who bought them. Well, when you're up against a brick wall, we need to research every person who attended that sale. Or if you're in reading a deed, and people appear, neighbors and witnesses and et cetera, appear in a deed record or a will, whatever. When you have your ancestors' record, it's very important that you understand the identity of every single person mentioned in that record, whether it's a will, deed, estate record. It's a lot of research, but it's truly important that you understand who they are and what their relationship to your ancestor is to start to be able to break down some of those brick walls. So that was a theme that kind of came up a lot too. So that was something I wanted to share with you. And lastly, for those of you who do church history research, or you're researching church records, this was a really a good tip for me that I had not used. A gentleman, actually one of my parents' good friends, really delightful man, and a very seasoned researcher said, he said, Lisa, don't forget to check on church records. Don't look just at births and deaths and baptisms, marriages, and all that. He said, look at the communion records. And that hadn't really occurred to me. I haven't done, because a lot of the research that I do tends to be Baptist, Methodist. I might get into some of the Catholic records. I have not done a lot with Lutheran records, which in some parts of our state are quite prevalent. So those churches, check and see, did your church you're researching, the record you're looking for, did they keep communion records? You can follow somebody through the communion records and learn about changes in their life as well that way. So I thought that was a great tip. So was really appreciative. Hang on, guys. I see comments flying by. Let me check them here. Stephanie says she couldn't get into history in high school because she couldn't relate it personally. I think that's a big key. Is we're in high school, we don't relate to it personally. And now that you've done genealogy, you're annoyed at how many family stories would have fit in and made it more memorable, even listening to other classmates. I get it. The facts were kind of dry, definitely in class. I think that sometimes teachers were trying to get so much material in. It was very difficult. But yes, I think when you can learn anything, and I think that's why genealogy is such a fabulous hobby that so many of us have gotten into, is because we relate to it personally, and therefore we can understand that history and really enjoy it. And Jim said, if only they'd made it more relevant to students. Turns out there is more to history than wars and politics. Yes, I agree with that, definitely. You never know what you're going to find in those ancestors. So thanks, guys, for sharing all that. I appreciate that. And hey, Jane, so glad you could join us from Wisconsin. Glad you are here. Okay, so let's get to talking about those pre-1850 census tips. Pre-1850 census, those can be kind of tough because obviously we just have the head of the household is listed. So if you are new to genealogy, if you're listening to me and you're new, after 1850, every person in the household was enumerated, but prior to 1850, so the 1790 to the 1840 census records only listed the head of the household. And then everybody else in the household was enumerated based on an age category. So you end up with a list of names basically and a lot of numbers that are over in these categories that are hard to find. So it makes it challenging for us as researchers to really be able to find an ancestor. So if your ancestor was a younger person or was not the head of the household, then it's hard to find them. Maybe they were in that household, they were absolutely of legal age or of majority age. They could have been over 21. They could have been an older generation living in there, but they won't necessarily be named, just the head of the household. So what do we do? All right, so the first thing that I always do for myself, and I just kind of have a stack of these that I've printed off and keep at my desk, is I have a blank form for that census year. And it is crucial, particularly with those earlier census records. It's hard, when you get those age categories, it's hard to decipher them. That's tiny, tiny print. So I have printed off just blank census forms so that I can, each year, so that I can make sure when I transcribe that I'm getting the right number of people in the right age category, because that's going to be important to me. It also helps because if you've done any research from, say, 1790 census, and you find your ancestor listed as the head of the household, and you scroll to the top to see what the age categories are, and invariably you're several pages in and the age categories aren't listed. So it's nice to have that handed to you right there. So definitely have that blank one there. The first thing that I do when I go into those pre-1850 census records, those early census records, is I really just kind of thumb through it or scroll through it. I'm looking for just my general, what is my first impression of this census record for this county in this state of this particular year? What do I notice anything about it? One of the things that I'm looking for is I'm trying to kind of, how large is that district that it's in? Is it a large one or is it a smaller one? I'm looking to see if I have a lot of similar names or if I have just a lot of varied names. So I'm not counting them, but the general number. So I could, do I have 50 Howards, but only, and then I have 50 other people and they all have different surnames. I'm just trying to kind of get an idea of, is this kind of the same family? Is this a more transient area? That type thing. Transient area, I guess, people coming and going. So that's sort of that type of thing I'm trying to get. The other very important thing that I'm looking for on a first impression is that census record that my ancestor appears in. Is it alphabetized or is it not? Because if it's alphabetized, that makes it easier for us when we're scrolling through those pages trying to find our ancestor. But what that tells me is I cannot use that information I find as to help rebuild their community or rebuild their general neighborhood. Because when they are not alphabetized, that indicates that record is one where the census taker, he didn't go back and alphabetize it, but they went through the neighborhood and it's how he went into the house, how he came to the houses. Now, it doesn't mean he went down one street and up the other in a very sequential order, or a very linear order, I should say. I mean, he could be zigging and zagging, across the highway, or, because based on how, particularly in the rural areas, how the farms are and placed and that kind of thing. But if you've got somebody next to your ancestor on that line, they were within the general vicinity. They may not have been the next door neighbor. They could have been the across the street neighbor. They could have been down across the street and down one house. However, they kind of came to them. So, but it gives me that idea. I know who was close if they're not alphabetized. Takes a little more reading on my part, but that's all right. Not a bad thing. The other thing that you want to do, and this is really important, do the math. So when you have your head of household, and then you have the people listed in the house with them, you might have, it might be easy to know that you have one male and one white male in the house, and he is age 30 to 40. Well, if you've done your research and you know from other census records that your ancestor was 35 during that time period, we can assume, okay, that's probably your ancestor. And you can actually calculate a birth date range within 10 years based on that age category. So what if they're younger children? I think in the 1790s, the categories are quite broad. So you might find 2 males under the age of 16 in the household. Does that match up with the 1820 census? When you find the family in the 1820 census, does it match? Do you have those 2 younger males in the family? They won't be under 16. They could be, I guess. But could you age them 10 years and put those 2 males in the right category for 1820? Because it's a lot more spread out that way. Then you might be able to put a name to a number. The thing to be careful about when you go and you try to put an identity to each of the numbers in those categories, you do that by doing the math, by creating approximate birth dates. Is there anybody in the family tree that you know for that household who could match those age categories? But what you don't know is if sometimes you'll end up with extra numbers, or what I call extra children in the family. Those could be children who maybe died before adulthood. So maybe they did have younger children. You might actually find extra children. You could also be missing children if you have older children who have married and moved out of the household. But you can start to put names, possible names to numbers, and build that household and follow your ancestors through the record. That's really hard to sound. It's kind of abstract. I actually have a couple blog posts on the website. I will put those in the comments section for you guys to follow up on, so you can see some of those examples in real life and where I've done some screenshots. I think that'll help you out quite a bit for that. Okay, guys, here's another one that's really important. And I'm going to tell you up front, guys, I completely did not do this when I first started researching my ancestors years ago, and I had to backtrack on my research. Turn the page. Make sure, for instance, in the 1830 census, when you read it, it's like a double-page ledger, I guess is the best way I can describe it. There are 2 pages. So you read the first page, But then you got to turn the page to get the second part of it as well. And there's a lot more information over there about the family as well. So the 1830 does that. I think the 1840 does the same thing. So turn the page and make sure you're not missing valuable information about your ancestors there. I didn't do that. I confess, I flat out did not know that early on in my research and completely messed that up. So I had to go back and redo some of my research. So, and again, none of us has time to be redoing research that we've already done the first time, right? So those are my best tips for dealing with those early census records. They're not impossible. I used to be intimidated. I think early in research, I was very intimidated with those because, whoa, how was I supposed to find my ancestor in the census record when not everybody was named? But take your time. Don't rush that and do the math, because when you do the math and you can establish some of those birth date ranges, you can start to put some of those identities. You can tentatively identify those ancestors in that record. Do the same thing for each census record, 1790, the 1800s. Keep moving forward, and you'll start to see that pattern emerge for you. Okay, guys, I'm about done for today. So if you have anything, feel free to drop it in the comments. Go ahead and drop the comments in below, because I would love to share those with you. If you are watching this later, feel free to drop comments in anyway, because I do monitor the comments afterwards and we'll follow up with you on that. So I'll be happy to do that. Oh yes, back to Debbie put in there, back to our earlier discussion on history class. It's a lot of history, and really connection is the stories. I think that's how we as genealogists really I think that's how we connect with those ancestors. It's through their stories. And I think early on, a lot of us probably started out in trying to build that family tree, but very quickly learned it wasn't just about finding the names and the dates. It was about the stories that they told us and the stories that they had. For me personally, I don't know if you guys know this. Oh, you're welcome, Debbie. I was interested in genealogy. And as soon as I started, I inherited a lot of my great-grandmother's photographs and letters. I can't tell you how many letters of hers I have, and really got the stories. I know all about the beaux that she had, and all about, the two main contenders to be her husband, and who she chose, obviously, but who she didn't choose, and who her friends were. And so that's been it's brought to life a woman who only lived 27 years and nobody of living memory has, but we know a lot about her and about her personality. So the stories are special and they're unique to us. And I think that's a lot of our why when we start to connect. In fact, that is Roots Tech theme this year, is the story of you. It's about the stories. So anyway, have a great day, guys. If you think of a question later, feel free to drop it in, and I will talk to you now. Oh, Jean said, are the forms for census available online? Absolutely. And when I put the link into the comment section just a bit, I will have a link in there where you can find the free forms to download. Ancestry has them, and I don't think you do not have to be a member of Ancestry.com to get those census forms. Census.gov, you should be able to find them there as well, in the genealogy department as well. So, but I'll make sure I put a link in there for you guys to find blank census forms. Just print them out once, you've got a set, you're good to go. Jim says you have letters back to the 1700s, really helps a lot. Wow, to have them back to the 1700s, that is fabulous. Yes, it really does. It really tells a lot of the story of who they are, and you start to get some of the personality behind your ancestors. Sometimes you discover things you're not quite so sure about, but it's a lot of fun to be able to do, and to really just find out. It was their social media, basically. They didn't do anything new. They were like us, but they just didn't share it on Facebook every day. They did it through letters. So yes, wonderful. You are welcome, Jean. No problem. So, all right, guys, have a fabulous rest of the day and the week, and I will talk to you next week. Bye.